So I want to start with an article that was the CNN has been following this. A number of blogs have been following it. There were a number of words that New York State actually they published a list of words that they plan to remove from standardized tests that are used in the state. It's kind of a strange list. It includes everything from dinosaur to religion to birthday. These things have implications in various various religions, various cultures, and obviously New York, particularly containing New York City, has a very heterogeneous population to which New York State is trying to be sensitive. New York State also includes some extremely rural, fairly conservative areas up into New England, and so there was an attempt to be sensitive to that. It seemed to me misguided from the get-go, and in fact, the outcry over kind of the ridiculousness of it has led New York State to pull back, and so the Department of Education said, never mind, we're not going to ban these words. Instead, we'll just ask people to be sensitive in their test development, which makes sense. I can't imagine why we need to go much further than that, particularly in terms of legislating the removal of really quite benign words. So glad to see that has been put to bed. Obviously, I think most of us who've taken a standardized test in the last 20 years know that there's always multicultural examples given, and those math word problems always include an appropriate mix of people with different names, different cultures. That's all well and good, and it's fine to make these things relevant for the folks who have to take the tests. But keeping the word dinosaur out, well, okay. Which actually leads quite nicely into our next story. This was just featured on the Wall Street Journal online, and Tennessee now is the latest state here in the U.S. to be looking at some legislation allowing the discussion of creationism, of intelligent design, and of the various things that can cause any number of sorts of controversies among parents, school boards, and all the stakeholders in education. This is something that has come up over and over and over again. And we hear it, particularly in conservative states here in the U.S., but in countries around the world, particularly those which tend to have a little more religion injected into their governments and into their cultures. Certainly, there's going to be hot button topics that are a struggle to educate around. When we're talking about the theory of evolution in class, you're going to have students who have questions and who genuinely believe that it isn't true, and who will point out that it's not called a theory for nothing. This bill seeks to open up classrooms to discussion, and some of the wording is it sounds benign in that allowing teachers to have discussions about alternative theories. Well, it seems like that's actually a reasonable thing in class. I think most classrooms do address at least student questions, and with the emphasis being on the science and all the evidence that we have today. The ACLU obviously is concerned about this. Teachers unions, in fact, are concerned about this. The scientific community, the last thing they believe that we need is the teaching of more unscience. I think that the real concern is that basically this is going to open up a pretty slippery slope. Where do you stop a discussion of alternative viewpoints and turn into actually teaching creationism, for example, or intelligent design? The legislation also specifically calls out things like global warming, which they refer to as a theory, and one that is potentially untrue, even though we have countless bits of evidence, not just bits, but really quite significant evidence that the climate change is a real issue. It's that idea though of the slippery slope, that's where this really starts to go awry, and it's the place where we could certainly envision teachers parents, students, kind of derailing what is a well-established science curriculum and what is well-established science. We have lots and lots and lots of very concrete evidence for all these things that they get taught and that yet still have detractors. I think some recent statistics suggest that in the United States there's a significant percentage. I don't have that number on the top of my head, but we're talking on the order of 15 to 20% of people in this country who do not believe that evolution actually took place. And obviously people are entitled to their beliefs, but this mixing of religion with an actual science curriculum in schools is troubling at best, and this is what the various opposition groups are calling out. It looks as though this is going to pass in a fairly conservative state with a fairly conservative legislature, and it's headed for court. So we'll see if it does make it. It'll certainly make it usher to the state high courts. If it makes it up to the Supreme Court in the United States, which it may very well. This will be a landmark case, and it will be an important piece of defining casework. This is an issue that has been rearing its ugly head in schools for a very long time, and I can't imagine this will put it to bed. But perhaps as it makes its way through the legal process, we can see a bit of resolution to it. Hopefully, the resolution is one that favors science over unscience. We will see. There is a new bill in Arizona talking about cyberbullying, which is an issue that absolutely must be addressed. It is not something that it is not something that needs to be overlooked, or we can bury our heads in the sand. We can do lots of things to try and have really positive climates in the schools and limit bullying while students are on premise. But when they're at home, when they're on the internet, when they are out of school, where does the schools or the states, in fact, where does their reach extend? And how much can a student be punished for things that they do out of school online, in ways that schools traditionally have not had much reach? Most experts agree that if things are happening online or out of school, if they are affecting the learning process, and this goes back to a fair amount of free speech, casework and legislation, if it's affecting things that happen in school, then it's school business. And so if a student is intimidating and bullying another student online, then free speech laws dictate that if that substantially affects the classroom environment, then it is not protected, and schools have the right to take action. The Arizona bill, however, definitely is a bit further reaching, and free speech advocates are up in arms, and I think for good reason. And I hate the idea that these things are getting clouded by the actual issue of bullying, and cyberbullying is being clouded by something that is such an overreaching bill that really affects free speech that now we aren't able to address bullying in a reasonable way. Let me just read a section, though, of the amended bill that's making its way through the Arizona House right now. It is unlawful for any person with intent to terrify, intimidate, threaten, harass, annoy, or offend to use any electronic or digital device and use any obscene, lewd, or profane language, to suggest any lewd or lascivious act, or threaten to inflict physical harm on the person or property of any person. It's also unlawful to otherwise disturb by repeated, anonymous, electronic or digital communications the peace, quiet, or right or privacy of any person at the place where communications were received. Wow. That covers a whole lot of interactions, and read quite literally. I'm looking at the letter of the law. We can't have students swearing on Facebook anymore. We can't have students sending a text with a curse in it, and just how do you define harassment? I'm not saying that students should be harassing each other on their phones or on the internet, on a tablet device where they send a tweet. But obviously, our intent here, the intent is to ensure that students aren't we've had some very high-profile suicides here in the state of Massachusetts. There have been some very high-profile cases of students killing themselves because of significant bullying, both in and out of school. And obviously, we need to do something to help protect our students and promote reasonable climates. But to take this to this level where we are really infringing on the rights of students to communicate in ways that are somewhat natural, I think this steps way beyond trying to limit bullying and starts getting into some scary free speech implications. So if you live in Arizona, now's the time to contact your legislator, but it's also time worldwide for us to really be thinking about a framework for keeping students safe, making them feel welcome and included, and for making sure that schools are a place for learning and not a place of torture. There are an awful lot of times when students don't have no desire to go, students don't want to go to school often anyway, when they are really when they really struggle with their peers and find that the school is not a safe place, that there's nothing that interferes with learning more. And so as a result of that, we need a framework that is better than anything we have out there right now, because none of them are terribly effective and most are somewhat arbitrary. We need a framework for really helping students interact with each other appropriately, behave as very reasonable digital citizens, and we've even heard the same thing from Charlie Osborne in our conversation. She of course was talking about just our digital footprint, but digital citizenry is something we need to be teaching, and interpersonal interactions, both in a professional and reasonable manner. They all need to be part of what we teach and how we work in the classroom. Do we need to make sure that no student ever sends a curse word from their mobile phone? Probably not. So we will see where this goes. But this is not the way to solve bullying. And bullying has been going on for probably many thousands of years. There's got to be a better way, whether it's digital or otherwise. There needs to be a better way in a modern society to deal with the way that we interact with each other. So one other article I wanted to highlight is there's an article on All Things D, why tablets in the classroom could save schools $3 billion a year. And, that's a big number. It's a very big number. It's a fraction of what we spend on various bits of education. But I don't think this number is actually out of whack. And obviously it's a group of publishers and technology companies who are talking about it. But the idea is as Peter Kafka points out in All Things D, digitizing classrooms is a good idea. That's the premise of this. But unfortunately, I think what we're seeing, and we've certainly seen it with Apple's iBooks, we've seen it with publishers who are really not doing anything in terms of DRM. We aren't seeing them do anything smart in terms of how they get digital content to schools and to students. We're not seeing prices come down on digital text that much versus the traditional dead paper texts, even though obviously distribution costs go down to nothing, development costs go down, publishing and printing costs go down. All these things, we know that they're saving a lot of money and they're simply just making more money on what should be a new model of distribution. So, Peter Kafka, as he says, let's say for argument's sake that digitizing classrooms is a good thing. That's true, but not because doing so is going to save schools money anytime soon. And certainly with our current model of doing things and of distributing content, of using mainstream content from the big publishers, it certainly doesn't seem to be saving anything. Then, of course, there's the initial outlay of capital for the devices themselves. That being said, let's take a step back and let's think about how we could hit that 3 billion number or a bigger number. And I think we can. And here's how. So we can get price points down on tablets and computing devices, when we can make sure that we have equity in terms of who has access to these devices and how students can actually get the content, whatever that content might be. then all of a sudden we start thinking about making use of the wide variety of resources we have out there. And Kristen Winkler and I have talked about this on Review Ed ad nauseum, and then with good reason, because it's so critical. And Audrey Waters talks about the same thing. The idea of the textbook is very much an anachronism, and there's huge amounts of wonderful, rich information available on the internet, direct from subject matter experts, that teachers can now curate. And this I think curate is the word of the year, and that's okay. It should be, because we are nearly overwhelmed by information and by teaching resources that are online and that are available digitally. Many of which are available for free or are very low cost. The teacher, as a subject matter expert, has to be able to pull these things together and share them with students. And when that can begin happening, when tablets are inexpensive, when students can access the internet and access these resources online, and when teachers are willing to step back from sort of traditional textbook classroom models and start pulling information together, sharing with their students, getting students to share and synthesize and put extra information back out there. We've talked about this, with Mentor Mob last week, and I just talked about them. I talked with Vince of Mentor Mob on WizIQ during one of WizIQ conversations. When students start creating their own content based on these open resources and are synthesizing and sharing and discussing and collaborating to produce this, okay, now all of a sudden we can start thinking about just how much a tablet or a computing device of any sort can save a school. When it's the same old, and it just happens to be on a screen instead of a book, well, your backpack's going to be lighter, but your budget and your bottom line certainly will not be. And as things stand, we talked recently about Apple iBooks and how, in fact, it's going to be quite drastically increasing costs for schools. This is the opposite of what's supposed to be happening with digital content, with digital books, with the promise of tablets. It's time for a shift. So we will see. I absolutely agree with Mr. Kafka that in fact, unfortunately, this isn't going to happen anytime soon. But the technology is already there. The content is already almost there. The biggest thing we have to change now to see these savings happen is changing the pedagogy and changing the mindset on the use of content of this sort. So we've got a ways to go, I think. But the potential is there. Huge savings to be had. Different model, very much needed.